For the past 50 years, photographer Terry Evans has enjoyed national acclaim. She's one of the most important landscape photographers of our time. Her straightforward but richly complex photographs of the Midwest prairie are familiar yet surprising, encouraging the viewer to see this landscape and the people living there with fresh eyes and new understanding. She's also turned her lens toward the steel industry, the city of Chicago, specimens from the Natural History Museum, and Greenland. Her work consistently reflects curiosity and adventure and is a celebration of beauty and belonging. The Nelson-Atkins has the largest holding of her work and mounted a career retrospective several years ago, and we are lucky enough to be speaking with her today. Welcome to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, where we take you beyond just the art on the walls and into the stories of the artists themselves. I'm your host, Kathleen Layton. Terry, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
You grew up in Kansas City, and you were given your first camera at the age of 4. Then, as a teenager, you worked in your dad's portrait studio. But then when you went to the University of Kansas, you studied painting and drawing. How did you come to be studying that and not photography?
I never thought of myself as a photographer. And art was always my favorite subject in school. And then when I was there and majoring in art, and also using my father's camera from time to time, I felt like the two were so intertwined. And really, at that time, the only photography that was offered at KU was in journalism. And I didn't want to be a journalist, much as I admired a lot of journalistic photography. I wanted to be an artist, and I wanted to use what I was learning in my art classes and from my art teachers in photography.
And look how that's changed now.
Oh, I know.
It's
my
not
goodness.
just journalism for photography.
Yeah.
That's a great change, don't you think?
Huge.
So then Robert Kennedy actually came to Allen Fieldhouse in 1968. You finagled a press pass, and you borrowed a camera from your dad, and you photographed that event. You have said that was a turning point for you. How so?
Oh, it was such a turning point because I'd been working for several years at KU as an art student, and really hadn't given much thought to photography. But one thing I had a problem with always in my art classes was trying to figure out what to do next. What was I going to draw? In many classes we had very specific assignments, but otherwise. And then that day, there I was in the world with a camera, and here was this whole world before me. And I realized that photography could be an interface with the world, and that I could tell many stories through photography where, in a way, it would be a collaborative effort. It would be this coming together of the world and my working to understand the world through photography, and to see the world and to see the stories of the world through photography, which felt like a different thing than photojournalism, because I wasn't photographing particular events just to have the best picture of that event, except for that one day when I photographed Bobby Kennedy.
Was it exciting?
It was thrilling. It was so exciting. There I was down on the floor of the field house at KU with all these press photographers who knew exactly what they were doing. And here I was using my father's Nikon for the first time. And in those days, the Nikon was definitely what the press photographers used. And, it was so exciting.
And that really did change your life, the course of your life.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. Because after that, I I continued with photography, and almost exclusively with photography.
And you started photographing the prairie not long after that, is that correct?
It was about 10 years later, because the first 10 years were about wanting to understand conditions of poverty through photographing people. And I worked with a great organization called Crosslines Cooperative Council. And those were the days of Lyndon Johnson in a great war on poverty. We thought we could end poverty. And so the director of Crosslines, Don Blakely, introduced me to many people in North Kansas City, Kansas, people that their program served. And after a few times of working with him, I just would wander around the neighborhood, and each time I would go, I would bring people photographs that I had taken the time before. And so I got to know many families and could tell their stories.
That was an amazing time for you, wasn't it?
It was so amazing. And at the time, I thought documentary photography is what I would always do. I was not at all interested in land or landscape issues. That seemed incredibly boring to me. I couldn't imagine why anybody would want to do landscape photography.
A lot of people feel that way, but then you turned into a landscape photographer. How did that happen? When did you start photographing the prairie?
I started in 1978, and it was because my friend Wes Jackson, who had started the Land Institute out in Salina, Kansas, where I had moved with my husband. And he asked me if I could document some research work they were doing. He was trying to understand how various native prairie plants work together. And so I started doing that. And in doing that, I started really seeing the prairie and seeing the ground and the tremendous complexity and beauty. And then that was all over for me. It's all I've been thinking about ever since. So it's a slight exaggeration, but in fact, beginning to understand the prairie ecosystem and to see it taught me so much about the interconnections of what an ecosystem really is, and the complexities and the relationships. And so more than anything else, it was looking at the prairie ground that made me think, oh, well, if I could just look long enough and hard enough, I might understand the structure of the universe, because here is a perfect ecosystem. And if I understand this biology, surely I can understand everything else.
You wrote, photographing the prairie consumed me, filled me, nourished me, gave me ecstasy. The prairie has shown me cosmic order.
Oh, that was good that I wrote that.
And then but that shows the strong reaction you had to finally understanding that prairie that to many people looks dull. And why would anybody want to be taking pictures of that? But you found that specialness there.
Yes, and also what I wanted to mention that it was very different than what I had thought of as landscape photography. I wasn't interested in making beautiful long views. For at least a year and a half, I simply photographed the ground, looking straight down at the ground with a square format with my Hasselblad, and trying to understand the interrelating patterns there. So, and I think my work ever since then has been more a way to understand what I'm looking at, although I've always, I think, used everything I've ever learned from art history and from my own study of art. But it's more about understanding what the story is, what the reality is of what I'm looking at. looking closely enough.
And as a woman, your story is very inspirational, because when you started doing this, there were not many female landscape photographers who were being recognized when you started out. Did you ever think about that? Did that bother you?
I don't think I actually did think about it very much. I mean, I was living in the middle of Kansas. I didn't really know many other photographers. Over time, I did get to know them and work with other photographers who I respected and admired and enjoyed very much. But even then, I didn't really know many other women photographers. But I didn't think about what I was doing as being unique. It's just what interested me.
It was the path you decided to take.
Yeah.
How do your photographs convey your feelings about the environment and how we've treated the environment?
For a long time, I felt like I wanted to tell the stories of the prairie, and I wanted to let people decide whatever they wanted. Until I went to North Dakota and started photographing the fracking in North Dakota. And my friend and colleague Elizabeth Farnsworth, journalist, and I worked on a project together photographing the oil drilling in North Dakota, starting in about 2010 or 2011. And so so the drilling was in full swing then, and I saw what it was doing to the ground and to people's lives, disrupting their lives because of land that had been taken over for drilling, and disrupting the land itself. And I came home after that. We worked on that off and on for a couple of years. And after that, I thought that I really needed to speak out for the prairie in a stronger way. And so I started working with an organization in Chicago, the Natural Resource Defense Council. And they introduced me to people in Southeast Chicago who were protesting the storage of petroleum coke on some of their land in their neighborhood. And this is land where the steel mills used to be, and the steel mills had been closed down. And then at that point, it was a largely Hispanic working class neighborhood, very, very solid community. And here along the Calumet River were these huge mounds of petroleum coke. Petroleum coke is so dirty oil was being shipped down from the tar sands in Alberta and refined at the BP plant just over into the Indiana, across the Indiana border. And then the waste from that is being shipped to other countries. Not very much of that extremely dirty energy used here. And so it was stored on the southeast side of Chicago, right in the middle of this neighborhood. And so in large piles owned by Koch Industries. And so that would blow into the neighborhood. It would blow into people's homes and on their cars and into their lungs. And so there was a very strong grassroots activist group, and I joined them and photographed the land, that very industrial landscape, and learned a great deal, not just about the petroleum coke and the polluting factors of it, but also about how this is the kind of industry that is imposed in neighborhoods that are supposedly powerless. But what happened was this group was finally able to get those storage sites moved. the sad part is they were moved somewhere else. They didn't disappear.
They still exist.
They still exist.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the first time I had ever really equated, the first time I had really understood and turned my full attention to environmental justice and started seeing not just the land in the landscape, but how it was not interfacing, but intersecting human lives. And of course, I had seen that in North Dakota too, but this was the first time I feel I had really put my voice to it.
I'm seeing the progression of your work as you're talking. You also photographed the city of Chicago, as you were just mentioning. That was the turning point, and the steel industry, of course. Where did the specimens come in? You photographed specimens at the Natural History Museum.
Yes. Oh, that was so much fun. Oh, my. So when I had been in Kansas, I had photographed plants, and I had learned the names of the prairie plants, and I loved them. And so one of the things, I loved moving to Chicago, where Sam, my husband, had moved for his job. But I missed the prairie desperately, the Kansas prairie. And I thought, well, maybe I could learn something about these expeditions to the West in the 19th century and the plant specimens that have been brought back and mounted. And so I went to the Field Museum, and I found a man, Dr. Berger, who was a retired botanist, but he was still there on staff. And he let me come. And he would take me to the storerooms and where there are floor-to-ceiling cabinets of these mounted specimens. And I would be looking for particular plants each time. And he would pull them out. And then I would set them up with a 4x5 camera and photograph them. And then, after I'd been doing that for a while, I moved to again, through the hospitality of the museum and generosity. And then I started working in the birds collections and snakes and fishes. And so, that was just a glorious exploration.
It sounds really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
How does the passage of time reflect how you see your work? Do you look at it differently today than you looked at it 20 years ago?
I really do. The exciting thing to me is that after 50 years of looking at the prairie, I'm beginning to understand it in new ways and see new things. I don't think we have time here for me to go into all of that. But what's really thrilling to me is that just in the work I'm working on now, which is about Dakota Formation sandstone, and I'm seeing that no longer do I need to look at the surface of the prairie ground, but I can go very deep to this sandstone, which is 100 million years old, with the native prairie ecosystem being only 60 million years old. So, but it's all very thrilling, and to keep learning new things is such a gift.
Well, to keep energized about what you've been doing for so long, how do you know when you're looking at a picture whether that is the picture? How is it compelling to you?
Oh, I never really know for sure. Well, I guess occasionally some are just quite obvious, but mostly I'm working to better understand what I'm seeing. And so I'm trying to frame it in a way that shows, like if it's a Dakota sandstone rock lying on the ground, then I'm trying to see that rock through the frame of my camera. And usually I will see things after I process the images, which are now digital, that I didn't see when I was first looking. And that's part of the fun of it. Then later I have all this material to look at and learn from.
And what is the other fun of it? There must be so much fun to it, to continue doing it and to continue finding new things to photograph and to continue
Yeah.
to be excited about it.
Well, the fun is the exploration. It's just the exploration, to feel like I can be an explorer.
Are you
That
an
I am
explorer?
an explorer.
Or are you an explorer or a photographer?
You know, I think I'm an explorer through the means of photography.
Do you feel lucky to have had the career you've had?
Oh my gosh, I feel lucky to have been able to learn so much and to keep on seeing new things. Yeah, I feel very lucky.
We are lucky to be talking to you today. Terry, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you.
You're a delight.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Art Bites, a podcast from the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. I'm Kathleen Layton. We'll see you next time.